world is watching closely as Trump maintains a naval blockade in the run-up to scheduled peace talks. What began as a coercive move to gain leverage at the negotiating table has become a focal point for diplomats, military planners, markets, and ordinary people whose lives and livelihoods now depend on whether a breakthrough can be found or whether tensions will spiral. A blockade is by design, blunt and visible. It interrupts commerce, it makes shipping routes more dangerous and expensive, and it forces third parties to choose or to try to thread the needle between competing pressures. That visibility is part of the calculus. A blockade signals resolve in the starkest terms. It is intended to force a wounded adversary back to the table or to compel concessions by making the economic and political cost of resistance intolerable. But it also carries risks that are immediate and deep: miscalculation at sea, accidental clashes that can ignite wider conflicts, sharp spikes in global EAG workloads, energy prices, and the erosion of trust among allies who may prefer quieter multilateral tactics. In practical terms, a naval blockade reshapes day-to-day life far beyond naval bases and ministry buildings. Freight companies reroute, insurance premiums soar, ports replan their schedules, and markets immediately begin to price in scarcity. For jurisdictions that depend on steady flows of energy and raw materials, the shock is acute. Consumers feel it at the pump, businesses feel it in higher costs and delayed deliveries, governments feel it in sudden budgetary strains and in pressure from exporters and importers to act quickly to restore normalcy. The timing is critical. Peace talks, by their nature already fragile and full of theater, suddenly must contend with a kinetic leverage play. Proponents of the blockade argue that the threat of sustained economic strangulation can concentrate the minds of negotiators and produce results faster than patient diplomacy alone. Skeptics counter the risk at bargaining under duress often produces fragile agreements that collapse once the pressure is lifted, or agreements signed to buy time rather than to settle underlying disputes. Either way, the link between the blockade and the talks will be inseparable. Every move at the table will be read as a response to the pressures being felt in ports, on tankers, and in civilian refrigerators. Diplomacy now operates on two tracks: the visible plenary track of talks and the shadow diplomacy of back-channel assurances, third-party mediation, and quiet de-escalatory steps. Friend and foe alike will be calculating how far to push and when to step in. Regional states, some of whom have long sought to avoid direct confrontation, may find themselves forced into public positions. Allies who depend on the imposing party for security guarantees will face a delicate balancing act, supporting a partner while pressing for steps that reduce the risk of an inadvertent war. Adversaries will test the blockade's limits, probing whether those enforcing it will retaliate against proximate threats or incidents. Neutral actors, merchant states, multinational corporations, and international organizations will call for restraint, for legal clarity, and for humanitarian exemptions. Legal questions loom large. Blockades have a long history in international law, but the circumstances that permit or forbid them are contested and fraught. Nations imposing such measures must demonstrate a legal basis and the capacity to enforce them without violating protections afforded to neutral shipping and to civilians. The political branch that orders and sustains the blockade must also reckon with domestic legal scrutiny. Courts, legislatures, and civic voices will assess both the legality and the wisdom of using economic pressure as a central instrument of statecraft. Debates over executive authority, congressional oversight, and the watchdog role of courts are likely to intensify as attention focuses on whether the blockade is proportionate, necessary, and properly constrained. The humanitarian dimension cannot be overstated. When ports and supply lines are interrupted, ordinary people, fishermen, laborers, small traders, families are the first to suffer. Food, medicines, fuel, and basic supplies can become harder to acquire and more expensive. Humanitarian organizations will press for specific exemptions and corridors for aid, and they will demand accountability if civilians are denied access to essential goods. Those appeals are often persuasive in public discourse, and they can become leverage for opponents of the blockade who argue that pressure tactics are disproportionately harming people who had no part in the original conflict. At sea, the risk of confrontation is constant. Military planners will stress deconfliction protocols and rules of engagement, but the fog of operations, an intercepted radio call, a misread maneuver, a damaged ship can escalate into an incident with consequences far beyond the immediate parties involved. Merchant crews, many of them multinational and often operating on thin margins, face the daily hazard of navigating contested waters. Insurance underwriters will reassess risk models, and the global shipping industry will respond accordingly, adjusting routes, schedules, and costs. The economic ripple effects are complex. Higher shipping costs feed into inflation, disrupt supply chains, and can alter the competitive balance among exporters. Energy markets respond in real time to the perception of risk around key choke points. A blockade that impinges on a major strait or sea sea lane pushes prices up almost instantly. Traders price in the possibility of prolonged disruption, while consumers and policyability begin to feel the political heat of rising energy bills. Nations with strategic reserves may release them to steady markets. Others may seek alternative suppliers or routes. Still, others will lobby for diplomatic relief. Central banks and finance ministries pay close attention because the combination of supply shocks and geopolitical risk can translate quickly into broader market turmoil. Political fallout at home is inevitable. Leaders who opt for forceful measures often do so believing they are taking decisive action that demonstrates strength, but domestic audiences are nuanced. Some will applaud determination, others will worry about getting pulled into a larger and longer conflict. Opposition politicians and watchdogs will scrutinize both the strategic rationale and the costs. Public opinion may tilt in favor of de-escalation if tangible hardships mount or if the human toll becomes visible in headlines and on social media. For the leader who ordered the blockade, the calculus is not only foreign policy but political survival. Domestic support can be durable when success is perceived, but it erodes quickly if the strategy appears costly and ineffective. There are broadly three paths forward from this moment. The first is a negotiated resolution in which the blockade serves its intended purpose, to concentrate bargaining power and extract concessions that lead to a stable arrangement. In that scenario, talks proceed, technical teams hammer out implementation details, humanitarian access is restored, shipping resumes, and perhaps a framework is established to prevent future escalations. That outcome demands patient diplomacy, credible verification mechanisms, and meaningful incentives for all parties to abide by the agreement. The second path is a protracted stalemate in which the blockade continues, talks produce partial or ephemeral agreements, and international pressure fluctuates without producing a durable settlement. That path risks chronic instability, sporadic clashes, economic pain that worsens over time, and a slow normalization of a tense status quo in which commerce and diplomacy exist in uneasy balance. A stalemate corrodes trust and makes future agreements harder because each side's based of the regaining posture hardens. The third and most dangerous path is escalation. An incident at sea, a miscalculation on the part of a proxy force, or a political surge toward hardline postures could trigger military responses that expand the conflict geographically. Escalation is never inevitable, but every day a blockade remains in place without a credible diplomatic anchor increases the probability of accidental or deliberate moves that widen the fight. For regional neighbors and global powers, the calculus is stark. The cost of failure is measured not just in economic terms, but in human lives, displacement, and the potential breakdown of regional order. So what can negotiators, mediators, and international institutions do to bend the situation toward the first path? A few practical, time-tested measures stand out. One is to secure conditional, verifiable steps that link relief to compliance, clear, measurable actions that can be independently observed and verified. Another is to involve a broad, credible third-party guarantor or monitoring mechanism that can vouch for enforcement and provide technical assessments. A third is to carve out humanitarian exemptions in bright daylight so that civilians need not suffer while political leaders bargain. These mechanisms require trust, and trust is in short supply. Rebuilding it requires small wins and transparent verification. For the broader international community, the moment demands a mix of pressure and restraint. Public diplomacy matters. Clear statements that emphasize de-escalation and humane outcomes can reshape the incentives leaders face. Behind the scenes, quiet diplomacy can open windows that public statements might close. Economic actors, banks, shipping companies, and energy firms will also exert influence, often quietly, by shaping the costs of maintaining certain postures. Those private calculations sometimes have more immediate effect than public condemnations. At the human level, the blockade will be judged not only by diplomatic historians, but by the people who live with its consequences, families who must stretch already thin budgets, workers whose incomes become uncertain, students whose schooling is disrupted. These are the recalibrations that mark whether policy succeeds or fails in ordinary life. Political leaders who seek durable peace must answer to those real costs and show how their actions will produce more security, not less, for everyday people. For media and commentators, clarity is vital. Distinguishing between the immediate mechanics of a blockade, the strategic rationale behind it, and the long-term consequences for the region helps audiences understand what is at stake. Simplification risks misleading. The situation is neither a straightforward application of pressure nor a mere theatrical display. It is a high-stakes contest in which missteps can be costly and in which the line between bargaining and brinkmanship is perilously thin. In the weeks ahead, attention will. Focus on three things: the mood in the negotiating room, the behavior of forces at sea and in border regions, and the movement of markets and humanitarian supplies. None of these operate in isolation. An encouraging joint statement from negotiators will be tested by the first shipments that must pass through contested waterways. A calming communique at sea will be tested by how insurance markets respond. The work of averting disaster is often unglamorous: technical teams drawing up verification protocols, logisticians organizing humanitarian corridors, legal experts drafting exemption language, but those are the steps that make agreements stick. For all the drama and danger, history offers both cautionary tales and avenues for hope. Blockades have ended wars, but they have also prolonged suffering. Negotiations under pressure have produced peace, and they have produced fragile ceasefires that evaporated when the immediate threat was removed. The difference often lies in the details. There are credible enforcement mechanisms, whether the agreement addresses core grievances and whether those who are asked to bear costs see a plausible path to relief. As the world watches, the imperative is clear: reduce the chance of accident, create incentives for compromise, protect civilians, and keep channels of communication open. The alternative is not merely a continuation of this crisis. It is the risk that today's blockade becomes tomorrow's wider conflict, with consequences that would be felt far beyond any one region. Political leaders who wield coercive tools must also wield restraint and strategy, measures that make peace more, not less, likely. In the end, the outcome will hinge on decisions made in rooms and on bridges, on decks and at kitchen tables. The calculus of power is never purely military or economic. It is moral and political, shaped by leaders' judgments about what they can live with and what they are willing to change. For ordinary people caught weighing competing forces, those judgments are the difference between a future in which commerce and conversation resume and a future in which the costs of confrontation endure for years. What happens next will be closely watched, and it should be closely scrutinized. The world needs a solution that restores safety at sea, reopens the channels that sustain daily life, and creates a durable framework for resolving the disputes that push parties to the brink. If the blockade proves a bridge to a negotiated peace, it will be judged as a difficult but effective means to an end. If it becomes an instrument that hardens positions and prolongs suffering, history will treat it differently. The responsibility for which of those histories is written rests on the choices made now, calculated moves in the negotiations, precautionary measures at sea, and the political courage to accept trade-offs